As usual, we're going to kick things off with our visit with Calvin Fish and talk about what's news developing in the world of motorsports. And Cal, couple of big events and two open wheel series unfolding over this past weekend. First of all, let's talk Formula One Monza, one of the biggest events, the Italian Grand Prix, always on the schedule, a track that is just absolutely phenomenal. And I think at Monza, in a microcosm, it pointed out some of the issues that Formula One is still dealing with. One, even before we got into the race, the grid penalties that people were taking, because Monza is such a power-hungry track that everybody was swapping to get their best engines in. And what happens? It is one of the most convoluted things you could imagine. On the coverage, they were trying to make sense of who's actually going to start where after qualifying. And it took something like 4 hours for the grid to actually get released. So it was confounding F1 officials. Can't we do better than that in the world's premier series?
I think absolutely. And the devil's in the detail. We say it every week, Greg, with these regulations, with the various series. But the rule is there, and it's really understanding the rules. So it was a real Rubik's Cube of who goes where and when and how the grid would line up. I think even the teams were confused by it all. And ultimately, we had 9 drivers switching positions from where they were following qualifying. So in terms of the show, Greg, qualifying I find so exciting to sit there on a Saturday, whether you're at the racetrack, you're watching at home, sitting here in the US, and watch who's the fastest driver, who was second fastest on down the line, and then see the grid roll up for Sunday. And it bears no resemblance to what happened on Saturday. It's absolutely crazy. And you're right, Monza, power-hungry circuit. There's an opportunity there to do a lot of overtaking. So I think even teams are putting like power units in the bank, so to speak, so that they could take them later this year, a track that may be more difficult to pass on. They're getting that penalty out of the way. So lots of things to be learned there. I think that the qualifying should showcase itself in the grid on Sunday. I think that in terms of these grid penalties, maybe look at a different option. Let's make it points. I mean, ultimately, if you step further back on the grid, it's going to be a points penalty in terms of where you're going to finish on Sunday by starting further back. So let's just make it. First additional engine, 10% penalty in points. Lose 2 or 3 points. Another one, you lose double that. Try and make it a deterrent, because what's weird right now, as I understand it, Greg, your first extra power unit, you're allowed 3 for the year. There's a gearbox penalty issue as well. But when you look at the power units alone, first one is 10 grid spots. Second one is 5. To me, that makes 0 sense. It should be more of a technical one the deeper you get into the hole. So first of all, identify what really is the true number that you need. Look at the stats from this year. Is it 4? Is it 5? Make that the new number for all of the teams to utilize that. Then if you get beyond that threshold, then make it a points penalty. So you line up on the grid as you would. And at the end of the day, if you win the race, instead of getting 25 points, you get 22 or 20 or whatever the right number will be. So from the purists, they won't like it. But we've got sprint races now where there's additional points awarded there. Why not take away some if you're into those additional power units and make it simple come Sunday to see the grid and see who's the fastest driver starting at the front?
Well, I think that makes perfect sense. And it's tough to get people to invest their time to watch a qualifying session, which normally, you're right, is so compelling and so exciting, and know that the starting lineup's not going to resemble anything you've just witnessed. And it just makes no sense to me at all. And I think the point solution is a far better one. And we have to remember here that, yes, there's the sporting regulations, and I admire Formula One for really fighting hard to keep the sport pure as a sport itself. But the fact remains, there's a massive, billion plus viewing audience, and the fans at the track are paying huge amounts of money now to be able to be there and watch. You've still got to consider them and give them a show, which kind of leads into the next thing that I think pointed out a weak link in Formula One's rule structure right now, which was that yellow flag, and safety car at the end of the race. There was ample time for them to have called a red and give us some racing at the end. They elected not to do it.
Safety car deployed, safety car deployed.
It's going to stay safety car till the end, isn't it?
I have a horrible feeling that way. They're struggling to move the car. No, I think it's going to finish behind the safety car.
Why? They could easily just resume the race. Why are they so stupid?
yes, there was a rule in place, and I understand after all of the craziness from Abu Dhabi in changing that rule on the fly, that's a bad thing always. But then they adopt a rule that's still pretty absurd in many ways. And, the teams had an opportunity to vote on it and said, well, that's the best we could come up with. I don't buy that. And you think about the fans a little bit. And one of the options proposed, Cal, has been if you get within a certain percentage of laps remaining in the race, and if they're not a virtual safety car, that just sort of neutralizes the field and then you go back. But if there's a scenario requiring a true safety car where the field's going to be bunched anyway, within a certain percentage of laps remaining in the race, red flag it. Your thoughts?
I agree. I mean, again, it comes down to the rules are there, and they abided by the rules, which they didn't do at Abu Dhabi in the finale last year and cost Lewis the title, of course. We don't need to chew on that one anymore. But they laid down the rules as they're written, and now we get into the nuance of what's best for the fans. Do we want to see cars that can run at 200 miles an hour plus at Monza trundling around at 60, 70 miles an hour behind a safety car for the final 5 laps of the race? No. I mean, it's not how anyone wants to see it go down. Even Christian Horner, the Red Bull manager, team manager there, said this is not the way we want to finish things. So I think there needs to be a rule in place. But again, you can't change it on the fly. But I think you're right. Maybe 10 laps, 5 laps from the end, everyone knows the rules. If we get a full safety car within 10 laps to go, you know what? We're going to go red. We're going to reset this deal, have the same rules in place. If everyone has the ability to change tires, let everyone change tires. That's another nuance to the rules in terms of what's allowed under a red. But make it fair for everyone. So you've got someone sitting at the front of the pack who's now going to have a red flag, everyone right behind him with maybe an advantage. So try and neutralize that a little bit. But yeah, we've got to put on a show for the fans.
I almost dare not ask you about the safety car restarting. They followed the race director followed what they should do, and the race ended the way it was. Any view on that? The way things could have been done quickly? Maybe George could have been dispatched to take his place sooner.
The race direction is going to be under critics, but in this time they followed the rules. Maybe they could have done it a lap earlier or let George through, but at least they followed the rules and they accepted that the race ends on the safety car, and this is how it should be or shouldn't have been. And
let's not get into that.
We talked about it Saturday to Sunday, recognizing what the grid should be. And at the end of the race, no one wants to see it end the way it does. And IndyCar will typically jump to a red flag and have a reset if necessary if they think they're going to run out of time. I think F1 needs to look at a similar situation there.
Well, and it is incredibly exciting, especially in person at the venue, to watch Bernd Maylander hustle that safety car around, trying to keep those Indy cars that are just trundling around at bay. But I don't think that quite compares to, with 5 laps to go, a standing start to the race. That would be fireworks, and it would be a great show. And they need to proceed there. You brought up IndyCar. Let's move to that. Some interesting developments and machinations unfolding. That was the second big, open wheel event, the season finale for IndyCar, and a couple of milestones were set in a way. First of all, Will Power breaks Mario Andretti's all-time pole record. That puts him into very august company, no question. And with a very savvy drive, he goes on to win the championship. And let's talk about Will first, because savvy maybe is the one thing that he has matured into these days. I mean, nobody has ever doubted his speed. Those 68 poles clearly reflect that. But he wasn't always the most savvy race car driver in terms of accepting what he could. And he's admitted these last couple of years, he's evolved a little bit. I call it matured a little bit. Right. And it proved out this year, didn't it?
It really did. Just a wonderful campaign. I mean, he put together a championship season. You look at Newgarden, had 5 wins, I think, on the year, would dominate on occasion, but he had the up and down, that roller coaster year, and ultimately came up a little bit short. Will, from the outset, just employed a very different strategy to what we've seen from him and some of the other drivers in the championship, and it worked out. I mean, it was close. He never panicked. He was willing to take a podium versus going for the win on certain times throughout the course of the season. And it's a points game. It's a championship race. There's no playoff. There's no final. It's like what you accumulate over the course of the whole championship season determines your champion. And that's exactly what he did. And but But it's not easy, Greg. I mean, you know what it's like. We've been around so many drivers over the years. There's some drivers who just have to win. Their ego gets in the way. It's like, I can't let that guy beat me. I can't let him overtake me into this corner. And you take the move that Newgarden put underneath Will going up in the corkscrew there. That was tight, but Will just didn't make it easy for him, didn't open up the door. But once Newgarden was committed to him, he just stepped out of the way, got back in line, and then you had Grosjean who was chasing him down. He didn't panic. He was going through a stint there on a certain set of tyres, didn't have the pace, didn't panic, didn't throw it off the road, didn't ask for too much. And that ultimately is what gave him the championship title by finishing in that position he did. So just a wonderful championship year. His pole record is remarkable to beat Mario's long-standing record of 67. He's now got 68. He'll get many more. His days are certainly not up anytime soon for Will Power. So just a great year and just a very different approach to this season, and it worked out great for him. Really happy for him. He's a good guy.
In the off-season, my wife said to me, I believe you're going to beat Mario's record and you're going to win the championship. She said that to me, and it actually gave me confidence that I could do it. The fact that she said that, that's how much confidence I have in her gut feel. So she said those words, and I just couldn't believe that came true.
Yeah, he is. And a second championship, that's great. And I suppose when your name is Will Power, you do feel a little bit of pressure to prove it out on occasion. But he's definitely come around. The other big development there, and this is sort of tied in with the success he had, Alex Palou, the defending champion, who now gives way to Will Power after an off year. And obviously, we've talked about it. It's been debated, all of these contracts, the mess that he's been in. He just dominated the field. What was it, 30-plus seconds for a win at that track, which is generally unheard of. And then we find out, he's back with Ganassi next year. Everything's hunky-dory. How does that play out?
Well, I think there's so many ways of looking at that, Greg. I mean, we're talking about all summer long in how it happened, how his management team believed they had an out. Now, I've got no inside information. I haven't spoken to any of the direct parties involved, but just reading and understanding how it's played out a little bit, it seemed like Alex went back to the table, wanted a new contract. He was a champion, obviously at the top of the game, and Chip was willing to think about that. And I think what happened was that his management team said, as Chip is now putting a new contract in front of us, the other one is off the table, which means it goes away. And we can now look at this new contract and basically say we don't like it and walk away from it. Well, Chip's way too savvy for that if this is indeed what went down. He said, well, that's fine. Let me bring the other one back in that's still in place, and you're going to have to abide by those rules. So they got into this no man's land, and it's now been worked out. And the irony is that just yesterday they announced that Alex has indeed re-signed. He's back with the team, with the caveat that he can go off and do some Formula One testing and test other championships or other things outside of the Chip Ganassi Racing fold. And he's already in a McLaren as of today, testing at Barcelona. So they're giving it a little bit more freedom. I'm sure he's got a little bit more money than what he was signed up for. But I have to think, how has that played out this year, Greg, to go through the summer months with his team, with all of this noise around them? I really feel that if that hadn't been going on, he would have been in championship contention come Sunday. And then when he puts in a drive like he's capable of, like we saw, where he's basically unbeatable, maybe it would have been a second consecutive title for him. So I'm sure he's learned a lot from this. Drivers do at his young age. They get advice and they have beliefs that they feel that they're in the right and someone else is in the wrong. But you now end up with this deal where Alex is back with Ganassi for next year. The team may feel, well, he didn't really want to be here. He felt that the pastures were green on the other side of the fence. And then you got Felix Rosenqvist, who's immediately been confirmed in Palou's seat at the McLaren IndyCar team, feeling, well, they didn't really want me. They wanted Alex, but now he's not available. I'm in the seat. So it's not ideal, but, it's a complex game. There's a lot of things to go through. And the good news is we've got two amazing talents back on the IndyCar grid for next year. And I'm sure they'll all settle down. They'll regroup. It's a long off season for IndyCar, and they'll come out blazing for next season.